this one's really been weighing on my heart, and I believe in the heart of our communities. And it's a matter of that affects not only our society as a large, but also our individual witnesses as followers of Christ. And that is that we find ourselves in a time where anger, bullying, intimidation, name calling, all these things have become alarmingly commonplace. You think about social media as an example. It's a platform designed to bring us together, but it often becomes a breeding ground for division and hate. And in the social spaces, it's really kind of an anonymity on the internet that can really kind of embolden us to really unleash hostility and judgment upon others, and particularly those with differing viewpoints. You know, a tweet, a comment, or a post can quickly turn into, a barrage of insults and just spiral out of control. And we see it in our news today, especially today, where public figures and political leaders, they just hurl accusations at each other, and they resort to name calling, they resort to yelling, they resort to the fighting. They don't have any kind of constructive dialogue, and they're really not doing anything but just yelling at each other. And we see it in our own interactions too. When we discuss politics, faith, or social issues, those things that we talk about with our friends and loved ones, those often erupt into heated arguments and leave relationships fractured. And the scary part to me, what hit me this week, is how accepting we are of this. We just assume that this is the way that life is. We assume this is the way that it's supposed to be. Now, how can all this hate and anger and yelling be part of God's plan? Think about the last time you engaged in a conversation about a divisive topic with your family or your friends, or maybe even on social media, if you feel to do such things. Did it feel like a friendly exchange of ideas? Did it feel like you were having a constructive conversation? Or did it escalate into a shouting match, and did it feel like you were just yelling at each other? Now, this really presents a significant challenge in our faith, in the way that we as Christians behave, in the way that we as Christians act. In the way that we as Christians act. That's the word I'm trying to get there. Now, as Christians, Jesus calls us to be peacemakers. In Matthew 5:9, he tells us to love our neighbors. In Mark 12:31, he says to demonstrate the fruits of the Spirit, including love, joy, peace, patience. That was Galatians 5. He tells us to love our neighbors. He tells us to be peacemakers. And when we engage in name calling and when we engage in bullying, we not only stray from his teachings, but we also tarnish our witness to those around us. Have you ever thought about that? When we act foolish, when we engage in idle chatter, when we show anger and hate, we're not only going against what God has called us to do, what Jesus has called us to do, we're tarnishing our own witness. And that's when people look at us and say, well, if that's what Christianity is, I don't want anything to do with it. We have to ask ourselves, how can we as followers of Christ be a light in the darkness and not part of the darkness? How can we mold behaviors that reflect his love and invite others into a transformative dialogue? Now in Ephesians 4:29, and if you want to turn to that, I'm going to read this one. It says, Ephesians 4:29, do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. Now, Paul is reminding us that our words have the capacity to uplift or to tear down. We can see these negative words in our conversations and our daily interactions. We can see them as we talk to other people, as we talk about other people, and even as we refer to ourselves. How many times on a daily basis do you think you say something negative about yourself? Words have power. Think about the last time you talked about that person with your friends. And you know which person I'm talking about. Was it a lot of kind and positive words? Or was it a lot of idle chatter and gossip? Our words have power. Even when we talk about that person, and I'm saying that person, just, any person that we talk about like that. Because now we're just sowing those seeds of hatred in our own lives by engaging in that idle chatter and engaging in that gossip and talking negatively about these people. As we navigate the complexities of our interactions, we have to choose to build each other up rather than engaging in destructive patterns that plague our society. We're called to be greater than the world we live in and not to conform to the world that we live in. And so often we see Christians, pastors, people of faith that are engaged in this negativity of this world. Everything's a sin, everything's bad, that person, this person. So I want to explore today how we can embody Christ's love in a world that's rife with conflict. How we as a church community can make a significant difference in addressing this troubled trend. We don't need to look far to see the rampant bullying and intimidation tactics that permeate our culture. Like I was saying earlier, consider the public figures who are name-calling, engaging in this destructive dialogue instead of constructive dialogue, instead of being able to be on the same page, even when your view's different. Now, recently, and this is probably why this has been put on my heart, I've personally witnessed, and I know you've probably witnessed on media platforms, erupting in anger over political disagreements, where the terms of engagements they've really just devolved into shouting matches rather than any kind of conversation. You remember back in the day where we could have these debates and we could have meaningful conversation instead of name calling and pointing and blaming and bullying. When did bullying become acceptable in our society? If this was going on in our schools, do you think we just widely accept it, or do you think we do something about it? But when the adults are doing it, it's okay. That's how it's supposed to work. That's not how it's supposed to work. And it's not just a phenomenon on the internet or in our politics or in our news. We see it in our neighborhoods. We see it in our workplaces. We see it even within our families. And the moment someone expresses some different opinion, the instinct is often to cancel them. We're going to cancel you because you don't agree with us. You don't think the same way we do. You don't accept the way that I'm thinking, so we're going to cancel you. Rather than engaging with understanding and trying to determine what's going on and have a meaningful conversation. And this atmosphere really only discourages open dialogue, and it reinforces a culture of intimidation. And I'm not just talking our politics. How many churches have we gone to where the pastor tries to scare you or intimidate you or put fear into you because that sin's going to lead to death, and that's the message you get for the day? Yes, sin leads to death, but Jesus paid the price for that sin. Why are we preaching that message? Now think about the story of Jesus and the woman at the well. And this is in John 4. Here's a moment filled with tension and societal division. The Samaritan woman and the Jews, Samaritan and Jews, there's a lot of conflict. I think we've spoken about it in a couple of sermons. A lot of conflict at the time. They hated each other. There's no reason for these two people to be in the same place, in the same room, at the same time. But here they are, Jesus and the woman at the well. And Jesus, a Jewish man, was speaking with a Samaritan woman, someone who both groups looked down on each other. However, instead of bullying her or belittling her, he engaged her with meaningful dialogue. He asked questions. He listened. He shared insights that led to transformation. Because he was ready to have a conversation with this woman, the Samaritan, to have meaningful dialogue. It transformed her life. It transformed her life. And this is a powerful example of how we can approach others with love, even when we don't see eye to eye. But in our day-to-day lives, we have to choose to emulate this behavior, whether it's in the workplace, where tensions run high, or gatherings where we have a lot of different opinions. Let's remember that our goal should be to build each other up rather than to tear each other down. Our words have power, and we can tear somebody down in an instant. Instead of joining a chorus of anger and fitting in with the group that's attacking the person, we can choose to be the voice of reason, advocating for understanding, and be examples of love. Now, I want to look at Scripture to ground the understanding of how we as Christians should respond. So in Matthew 5:43 through 44, Jesus teaches us. He says, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love your neighbor and hate your enemy.' But I tell you, love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you." Now, this is a different way of thinking at the time, because the way they were living at that time is the way that we're living right now. Hate our enemy and love our neighbor. And when we think about the ministry of Jesus, it's clear that the consistency modeled a radical kind of love, and it defined the conventional responses of the time. He wanted to love his neighbor, the Romans, the Samaritans, the Gentiles, all the people that were persecuting him, chasing him, trying to kill him. There was prejudice, there was social division, there was rigid tension, there was all the things that were right for any one bad thing to go wrong and a war to start. The Jews were ready to kill the Romans, destroy them and take their lives back, for the kingdom to rise that they had been thinking was going to happen, and for Jesus to raise an army and just destroy them. And instead, Jesus said, "No, I'm not here for that. We're here to love them. We're here to forgive them." Christ challenged his followers to embody love and compassion. When he says love your enemy, it's not just a call to tolerate your enemy or tolerate those who oppose us. It's an invitation to actively love them. I can't stand that person, but I'll go hang out with them. That's not love. That's not what he asked for. He asked for us to love those people, to understand where they're coming from. Christ's own life was a testament to this. When he was betrayed, when he was wrongfully accused, when he was crucified, he didn't retaliate. Instead, he prayed for those who persecuted him. While he was still on the cross, in Luke 23:34, he said, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they're doing." When he was being killed, when he was hanging in pain, when he had been flogged and betrayed and turned away from, the people that had done all this to them, he was forgiving them. He was loving them. He was asking God not to be harsh on them. When we respond to hostility with compassion, we break the cycle of anger and resentment. We create a space for healing and understanding, not just for ourselves, but for those around us. In this love, we can lead others to experience the transformative power of Christ and his message. When we respond to anger, when we respond in a way that is loving and meaningful, as opposed to yelling and having to be right, that shows love that only Jesus could have given us. You know, I keep saying, if you leave this place, people should see that you're different. They should point at you and say, there's something wrong about that guy. He's different. Something's different about him. This is what I'm talking about. Loving people, even when it's hard to love people. Did you know that anger that results in hostility, hatred, or seeks revenge is a sin? Did y'all know that? Jesus taught that harboring anger in one's heart can lead to judgment. Matthew 25:21-22, he says, "You've heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder, and whoever murders will be liable to judgment.' But I say to you that everyone who is angry with his brother will be liable to judgment. Whoever insults his brother will be liable to the council, and whoever says 'you fool' will be liable to the hell of fire." Jesus is saying that anger can be as serious as murder when it comes from a place of hatred and contempt. And in the moments of anger, we must understand that we're not just reacting emotionally, we're also allowing ourselves to be pawns in a much larger game. James 1:19-20 reminds us that My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to become angry, and because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. When we succumb to anger, we may think we're taking a stand, but in reality, we're actually doing the devil's work for him. Yes, anger is a sin. Anger comes from a place where the devil can bring that up. But when we act upon that anger, we are no better than non-believers, and we are doing the devil's work for him. The devil revels in our anger. He loves watching us as we allow our emotions to get the best of us. When we get caught up in the fury, he sits back and laughs, knowing that our hostility only serves to hinder our witness to the world. When we become anger and hatred, we're doing the devil's work for him. And not only that, we are affecting the work that we're supposed to be doing for Jesus, for the kingdom. Instead of being beacons of hope, we're instruments of division and strife. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. And in this way, we will not sabotage our ability to reach those in need. Now, as followers, we're actually called to a higher standard. And Paul reminds us again, if it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Now, Paul starts off by saying, if it's possible. And what he's actually saying is he's acknowledging that peace might not always be under our control. Okay? Situations and individuals are going to make it difficult. They're going to make it challenging. They're even going to make it really, really hard to live in harmony. But the next thing he says is, as far as it depends on you. And when he says that, he's emphasizing that you have a personal responsibility in maintaining peace. Yes, the world might be out of your control. The person in front of you might be out of your control. The circumstances might be out of control, but you should be well under your own control. And when we can't control others' actions, we can control our own responses and attitudes. We don't have to react to someone who's yelling at us. We don't have to react to a situation that brings anger. He tells us to live at peace with everyone. He's telling us to pursue peace with all people, regardless of their backgrounds, beliefs, or actions. And I can throw in there their political stance. That seems to be the hot topic today. As followers, we're called to rise above anger and live in peace. So, how do we do that? Big question. First, practice active listening. When you're in conversations about sensitive topics, prioritize listening over speaking. Make a genuine effort to understand the person's perspective, even if you disagree. And I have to tell you, there are going to be a lot of people that you speak with, and you are not going to agree. But this not only fosters empathy, but also opens the door for constructive dialogue. Yelling, screaming, pushing, intimidating, bullying, that's not going to change someone's mind, and that's not going to make somebody believe the same way you do. But if you can find a common ground, then that's better than falling into the trap of sin and being the devil's pawn. Second, respond with kindness. Ephesians 4:32 urges us to be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ God forgave you. Kindness needs to be our foundation of our interactions, especially faced with hostility. Now, you were forgiven by God for whatever sin was in your life. When you accepted Christ into your heart, into your lives, when you accepted Christ as your Savior, you were forgiven as though it never happened. So how come you can't forgive or just be kind to someone who might think differently than you? And keep in mind, everyone's on their own journey, and you might be further ahead than they are, but that doesn't give you the opportunity or the right to be mean to them, to yell at them. And last, create a safe space for dialogue. So this church community, this church specifically, we have tried to cultivate an environment where all opinions are welcomed and respected. Every question, every comment, every person. We have to be able to have a safe space that promotes understanding and reduces the likelihood of anger escalating into conflict. Because anger is always going to be there. It's always going to be sitting there. And I'm standing up here as your pastor telling you that anger will always find a place into your life, will always find a way. Because I'm guilty of it. I don't know anyone in here who doesn't get mad. But you have to use your head. You have to use your heart. You have to use what Jesus has told you. You have to ask for forgiveness. Not just from God, from the person you anger too. Love your enemy. Now, remember, no matter how strongly we think we're right in any conversation, in anything that we do, that not everyone's going to agree with us. Can you imagine that? Wow. All of us have different opinions, beliefs, perspectives. That's what makes part of life so rich. That's what makes the human experience so great, is that diversity. But it doesn't give us the right to yell at someone because they don't agree or think the same way we think. And just because you think or feel that you're right doesn't give you the right to yell at somebody until they agree with you. And I don't know about anybody here. I can speak personally for myself. I've never yelled at somebody so much that they agreed with me. Never. I can't even get my dogs to do what I want them to do sometimes. True strength lies in our ability to approach disagreements with kindness and patience. How much stronger do you think Jesus was when he was being spit at, when he was being yelled at, when the Pharisees and Sadducees were tearing him down? How much stronger do you think it was for him to react with kindness and patience as opposed to throwing stones or attacking? It's easy to throw stones. It's easy to attack. It's very difficult to stand in patience and love, let the things happen, and then respond with kindness and love. And when you respond with kindness and when you respond with love, you're going to see how quickly that de-escalates. It might get a little bit hairy for a second, but it's going to de-escalate. Now, not everybody thinks like us. Not everybody agrees with us. And as Christians, we're there to spread the word of the gospel. We're there to share the word and to share that love. We're not there to judge. We're not there to condemn. And just because people think differently doesn't mean we have any right to condemn them. Now, I'm not saying to compromise your beliefs or silence your voices. What I'm saying is invite the possibility of learning and growth for both parties by acting in kindness. If you disagree with me and I have a conversation with you that is kind and loving and respectful, we might not come to the same conclusion, but at least we'll come to a compromise and we can learn to live together. If we hate everybody that comes in here that's not a Christian, we'll never fill this place up. And that's what we want in here, because they need to hear the word. So as I close, I want to reflect on the call to love in a divisive world. And Paul spoke about this in Romans 13:10. He says, "Love does no harm to a neighbor. Therefore, love is the fulfillment of the law." That means that love is not merely a sentiment. It's an action, a commitment to choose understanding over judgment, peace over conflict, and kindness over anger. So today, I want to challenge you, take the message beyond these walls and into every day, every part of your life, every day. And in the coming week, look for opportunities to practice love in tangible ways. Instead of instantly going to anger, instantly going to yelling, go to love and understanding. So as we leave today, I want to leave as instruments of peace, lighting the way for others in the world, often overshadowed by all this anger and all this division. And this is going to be the week that's going to be the hardest, Believe me when I tell you this is going to be a very hard week to show love and compassion. Just because you think you're right doesn't necessarily mean you are. Just because they think they're right doesn't necessarily mean that they are either. Stick to the word, stick to your compassion. Do not compromise your faith. In the spirit of 1 John 4:19, it says, "We love because he first loved us." So let's embody this love and become beacons of hope and reconciliation this week.